welcome to another edition of the Throwing Bagels Podcast. Kevin Mooney here with you alongside Jason Hamo. Hey, Jason.
Hey there, Kevin. How are you?
I am well. Yourself?
I'm doing well.
Doing well. And joining us, Chris Douglas, by the way, on assignment. So
special assignment.
So he will join us on our next podcast. I know he has a blog coming up next week, so I'm sure another globe-trotting journey for Chris on assignment. So he'll be sure to recap that in his next blog. But joining us now, it's a pleasure to have him back on the Throwing Bagels podcast. He's a co-host of the Fantasy Points podcast, also co-host with SiriusXM Fantasy Football Morning, and of course, a fellow Oswego grad. Please welcome back Brian Drake. Hey, Brian.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Am I the first two-time guest?
You're one of the first. We'll go.
You're about. I think we've had two or three others. We've had the coach of the basketball team, Leone, on a couple times, Coach Leone, and we've had Joe Yerdon on it a couple times.
Oh, Yerdon's the best. I used to.
Oh, and who was the other one? And
Brent Axe.
Brent Axe, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Brent.
I'm actually going to golf with Axe later this week. So
nice.
There you go.
We'll talk. It'll be like the SNL guys who have the jackets and everything.
You're on the two-time club.
Yep, that'll be us out there shooting the breeze. But I actually, Joe Yerdon was a guy I would go to in a pinch when I needed a guest when I was doing local radio in Syracuse, because I knew he could talk hockey. And I'm like, oh, look, here's a guy whose number I have on my phone, and he works for a legitimate site, whatever he was doing at the time. And he's very, very knowledgeable. So I was always very happy to lean on Joe when he always came through in the clutch.
Yeah, Joe's one of the great guests. So it's always you have full confidence that he can give you a solid whatever you need, right? 30, 60, 90 minutes of NHL talk. He's got it in the bag, man.
Now that I work in radio kind of full time, it's really something that you never thought about before. But if you can find somebody to get you to the next segment, like my father asked, he goes, oh, what's it like being on radio? And I go, all you're trying to do is get to the next break. And
just
like
get through.
A guy like that, if you can just filibuster, like, tell me about the Ottawa Senators. And then they'll go on, like, God bless you, Joe. Thank you.
Joe could go for a while talking about that kind of stuff.
Perfect.
So, Brian, you were recently awarded the Football Article of the Year by the Fantasy Sports Writers Association for your article called Fantasy Fatherhood. So first off, congratulations. That's a heck of an award.
Thanks.
And how did you feel after learning that you won?
It really was incredible. I knew the article was good. Not to kind of toot my own horn, but I knew it was a solid article when I wrote it. The funny thing is I've been nominated for that award, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. Never thought I would ever win it, because the awards that actually do win are these like really thought-provoking, nerdy football articles with all this data in it. And this is not it. This article is about my son learning to enjoy the game of football, playing in his first fantasy football league, his first draft, and then kind of what it's like to lose. So that's really the genesis of the whole article is, me as a father watching him find the game of football. And the underlying story I try to tell is it's okay for kids to lose at things, because we don't have enough of that, I think, in the world, where, everybody gets a participation trophy and everyone's told you're the best. Well, in the real world, you're not. You're going to lose. You're going to come in 5th place sometime, and you're not going to get a 10-foot tall trophy. So it was good to see him, learn to lose. And I think a lot of people, it resonated with them, and I'm so happy that it did. And I had a ton of DMs from folks saying like, hey, my kids are starting to get into it, or I remember watching football with my old man, and it just brought back a lot of good memories. So that meant the world to me. And I was thankful to the FSWA for recognizing my article. And we'll see if we can, get another glass trophy on the trophy case next year. I've got another really incredible article that someone came to me with, and he wants me to tell his story. A guy who is a fantasy betting analyst who years and years ago had cancer and was given basically a 50-50 chance to if he was going to live or die. And it just kind of changed his life. And then he went on to become, a really big success in fantasy. And he came to me and he goes, I want you to tell the story. So he thought enough of my writing ability. And that's more than any award. Somebody came and said, hey, I want you to write this about me. So I'm excited to get that going for, I don't know, hopefully we'll get that out this season.
Yeah, that the article, it was a great article, and it made me think of, you speaking of like losing and, losing somewhat gracefully, or just even not losing gracefully. And, like your son, like you said with your son, he was crying into a pillow. When my daughter plays softball, and last fall they had a playoff game and they lost. And the girls were hysterical after getting pissed off. They were like, they had never lost before. And never like before that, it was just like, all right, whatever, game's over. We all tied. That's it, game over. Now
Yeah.
that they had to play wins and losses, they were like, what's this? This is not fair. So I was trying to explain to them, now you shows that you want it, and you actually want to win, and you don't care, you really bothers you when you lose. But is that really what inspired you to write the article, like to teach him some sort of a lesson like that, or just showing him the ropes of drafting a fantasy football team, or what was it exactly that inspired you?
The article kind of, it takes place over a year, about a year or so, where he started coming down into the basement to watch football, which he never did before. And I was doing a show on SiriusXM on Sunday nights at the time. So I'm down in the basement, I'm doing tons of prep. And 1 week, probably, I don't know, 7-8 weeks into the season, he came down and he stayed and he's watching and he's kind of asking questions. And he's, I'm an Eagles fan, so we have the Eagles games on every week. And he just slowly started to get into it. And it was the year the Eagles went to the Super Bowl. So the Eagles were winning a ton. They were really good that year. And from that, he kind of expected them to win all the time. And when they didn't, it was a shock. And then he began to play fantasy football, and then his team was really good. And I didn't help him at all. I just said, hey, you go pick whoever you want. Like he picked Jalen Hurts in the first round with like the 4th overall pick. He's like, oh, I really want to get Jalen Hurts. Go, great, take him. And then in the 4th round, I mentioned in the story, he wanted a kicker. He goes, I think having a good kicker is important. And he wanted to take Justin Tucker. I'm like, well, this is like the one piece of advice I gave him. I'm like, I think he'll be there if you wait a while. Like you don't have to take him in the 3rd round, whatever it was. But it just kind of came and I saw it and it just hit me one day. I go, I think this would make for a good story. And that's how I like to write. There's a million guys who can write circles around me if it comes to here's your top 10 sleepers for 2024 and wide receivers who are going to bust. Nobody cares about that. I mean, I'm sure that they do. I don't. That's not what I want to read. It's tough to get anybody to read anything these days in the short form video world we live in. So if I'm going to write something or read something, it better be interesting or compelling and have something behind it. And I thought this did. And I didn't care if it won the award or not. That's not why I write things, but it was cool that it did. I remember when I won, they announced it on a radio show on SiriusXM, and I was in my car, unemployed, because I had lost my job, I don't know, a couple months before that. So I'm feeling like a complete loser, and I'm sitting in my car, and they said, all right, coming up next, we're going to go to break, and it's a fantasy article of the year. And then my phone lights up and I see that it's a New York City area code. So I know what it is. And I answer the phone and he's like, hey, this is so-and-so from SiriusXM. You won the award. We're going to go on live next. And he puts me on hold. Like I'm almost in tears at this point. And then they brought me on and I don't even know what the hell I said, but it was really cool. And then the follow-up, people just, the outpouring to say how it connected with them. And that's really fun to see is number one, somebody read the damn article, because in 2024, who does? But if anyone got something from it, I did my job. And hopefully with some of the other ones I'll have coming out in the future, it can do the same.
One thing that stood out to me in the article was when, you and your son had watched the Eagles lose to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, and you said wear your Eagles jersey the next day, and he did. Like you could see it under his jacket, so you knew he was going to wear it, and that must have been. I think that moment like probably resonated with a lot of people, who read that article.
It still kind of chokes me up to this day when I think about it. And I think you guys can understand that. I know, Hamo, you're a huge Mets fan, and you got the Mets game on in the background right now, and you would say the same thing because as an Eagles fan, it's been tough. Like, yeah, they've had good years and they've had nice, little runs, but they're kind of those lovable losers. Like at the end, it's going to break down and they're going to find a way to lose, and then finally, when they did break through and win in 2017, it was just, a party here at the house. But he was kind of too young for that. He was in 2017. So he was 5, I think, 5 or 6. So he really didn't get it when they won. But now he's coming of age and he's like, oh, okay, yeah, they're in the Super Bowl. If they win, it's going to be a big thing. So I'm happy about that. And I think a lot of fans out there, if you're a Yankees fan of late, maybe, but if you're a Mets fan, if you're a Cubs fan, a Bears fan, Islanders of late, those Rangers teams from until Messier and the guys got it done in the 90s, you know what it's like to just, you never break through. And every year it's like, all right, well, wait till next year. If you're a Knicks fan of late, it's like, God, when are the Knicks ever going to win again? But every year you're going to keep putting that Knicks jersey on because they're your team. They stink. And, the Mets always find a way to lose, right? And my son's now a huge baseball fan. We just went to the Yankees game over the weekend, but he watches the Mets, he watches the Yankees, and he's figured out now that you can't win every day being a baseball fan, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, that reminds me of the 2000 World Series, and Mets lost to the Yankees. The next day, I wore my Met jacket to going to work in Queens. So I took public transportation all the way from the ferry to the subway. I had my Mets jacket on. I got some like fist pumps, like, and some other people pointed and laughed, of course. But it is, you have to support your team no matter what.
I saw a kid at the gym. This was 6 months ago that I went to high school with. And he remembered that I was an Eagles fan from like middle school and high school. He's like, I remember you used to wear, Eagles shirts back in the day when they were terrible in the 90s. And I'm like, yeah, man, if you're a fan, you wear the team's gear. You don't
exactly.
Oh, they lost. Now let's go buy a Patrick Mahomes jersey or let's go buy a Tom Brady shirt. Like, no, you still wear your gear, man. Because one day they're going to win. One day the Mets are going to win the World Series again. One day the Knicks are going to win the NBA playoffs, it's going to happen.
I hope so.
Yeah, exactly. So you've recently started co-hosting the Fantasy Football Mornings on SiriusXM. What's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, that's wild to go from just doing a podcast. And I've been podcasting for, 7-8 years now. It's very different than radio, but I've always loved radio. That was my first love. That's kind of why I got back into podcasting. I never thought I would get back really on. I had a couple stints on Sirius, but I was working for this, and I still do work for a site called Fantasy Points. The guy who's the primary owner his name is John Hansen. He goes by the Guru. He's been on SiriusXM for 20 plus years, basically since fantasy sports radio began 21 years ago. And he kind of just wanted to retire. He didn't want to do it anymore. So he said, I'm going to step back, but I still basically own the time slot. They still want me and my guys to do it. So let me just dig into my bullpen here and pull some guys out. And I've been doing podcasts for him and with him. And he's like, hey man, do you want to come on and host this show? And there's a lot of folks probably who listen to this podcast who are, you went to school for journalism, for broadcasting at Oswego or whatever. If someone comes to you in your mid 40s and says, hey, random, guy who isn't currently on the radio, do you want to host a nationwide morning show? And it's going to start in like 2 weeks. You think it's a dream? You think they're punking you? Like, this isn't real life. This doesn't happen. You got to go work in Albuquerque and, Duluth and all these places to work your way up. It really was insane. And John and I had a conversation, and I'm like, listen, I've got kids, and I got to have a real 9 to 5 here because, while I do get paid for doing the radio show, it's not like it's my full-time job or anything. And he goes, I understand. He goes, let me tell you, 20 years ago, I started doing fantasy sports radio, and he had to do Friday nights. He goes, my wife hated it. I had young kids. We couldn't ever do anything on a Friday because I had to be on the radio. He goes, but I knew the opportunity that it would become if you do. And he goes, and I knew I couldn't pass it up. And he goes, Brian, that's what this is for you. You can't pass this up. You have to see where it takes you. Even if you're only on 2 days a week doing the show, like doing a morning show all across North America, there's a very few, handful of people that get to do that in any genre. And to get to do that, you have to take the ball and run with it. So it's been really fun. I've been doing it for, I don't know, 3-4 weeks now. And I can't wait till I really kind of get into the meat of the season and I can start infusing more and more of my personality and more of my bits. And I want it to be really comedic. I want it to be entertaining. I want it to be the destination place for fantasy football fans, where it's not just, you're not just hearing fantasy points, guys. I want it to be like the Tonight Show. The best in fantasy football come to our show in the morning. And if you work for whatever other site out there, ESPN, CBS, whoever, we're going to bring you on as a guest. And fantasy fans know, like, this is the show to hear the best in fantasy football.
And what channel can people find it on?
It's channel 87 is Fantasy Sports Radio on SiriusXM. It's on the app. It's on, in your cars. It's on your phone. The app for SiriusXM is unbelievable, by the way. So it's not just, Howard all the time. You can listen on demand. If you're not listening 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern, you can listen throughout the day whenever you're available. So yeah, I do Tuesdays and Thursdays right now. I'm like that fun Tuesday, Thursday class you had to take, and trudge into Lanigan. You're all hungover from mug night and it's a Thursday morning. And what were the classes that started on Thursday? Was it 9:35? There were weird times.
We had 8. Oh, Thursdays. Yeah, there was 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock was the first one, and then it would be like 9:25 or 9:35 or something like that.
But they were long, right?
Yeah, they were like an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah,
because they were 2 days a week.
Right. So yeah, just imagine that's what we are, talking fantasy football in the morning with you guys.
You've really been moving up, through the fantasy world. Lately, what has that meant to you to really start to get recognized and, after putting the work in to get to this point? What does it mean to you that people are really seeing the work that you're putting in?
It's obviously it's cool to be invited to these big events and to be on SiriusXM. And to me, that's the pinnacle. SiriusXM is the top. It's number one, it's professional, it's radio, people pay for it, and they pay me to do it. So anybody, and look at what you guys get to do here. And I've done this for years, making a podcast. There's no gatekeepers anymore. Anybody can have a podcast, anybody can have a YouTube show. You can get on Spotify or whatever and have the work be put out there. And fantasy football is an industry that there are so many people trying to make it. Just go on YouTube or any podcast platform, put in fantasy football and watch 8 bazillion podcasts populate.
Yeah.
And some of them are very good. There are. Just because, you're a podcast in your basement doesn't mean you don't have great information and real good entertainment value. But I knew from day one, I'm like, if we're going to do a podcast, it's going to look good. It's going to sound good. It's going to have professional aspects to it. And I went and got professional microphones. I had my buddy, John Gay, who you guys know, is a podcast professional. I had him create the imaging for the show. I had one of my fraternity brothers, Jeremy Caro, who is the, basically he's like the art director for SNY for the Mets. I had him create this kind of cartoon opening. So if you watched our show, you would go, oh my God. And the overlays and everything we had, like, these guys look like a show you'd see on ESPN or some big time. We were 2 schmucks in a basement, but we grew it and we thought of it as a big time show. We got nominated for Podcast of the Year, against like shows with hundreds of thousands of downloads, which, trust me, we did not have, but we always thought that we were on that level. And the guests that we went and got were on that level or aspiring to be on that level. So it's kind of like dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And then the people I would always associate with when I would go to these fantasy conventions or whatever, I would go right to the top. I'd go find the guys who were on Sirius and I'd be friends with them. Like that's the guys I'm talking to. Like I want to be at the mountaintop. So make friends with those guys. And then it sort of evolved that way where, I got to do these great drafts at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton. I got to go there again in a few weeks. I went from the first time I was ever at this event, I was just there kind of watching for the site that I worked for. And I said, hey, I'll put the stickers on the board. I'll be the auctioneer. This year, I draft in the A leagues. I'm in those and I'm doing it live on SiriusXM. I'm like one of the hosts of the draft. So it really is just this incredible ride to see where it's gone. And it can only go up from there. People seem to like the work I do because it's not like I have 500,000 followers on Twitter. I have like 8,000, which is awesome. Thank you to those people. But I know tons of guys that have 50, 60, 70,000 followers, whatever it is these days. So, good for them. But hey, it's cool. It's a cool ride for a guy that started out talking pro wrestling in the basement of Hewitt Union, man. So I'm all for it.
How big is fantasy football these days? I mean, obviously it's really big and it's $1 million, multi-million dollar, industry. But there must be like millions of teams created every year.
Oh yeah. ESPN does a fantasy football marathon and they sign up, probably millions of teams during they have a little ticker that goes and they show how many teams sign up for it. And that's just ESPN. And there's still, Yahoo and Sleeper and all these other sites. But the sports betting, the prop betting has really helped explode fantasy sports. The best ball games, where I think, fantasy football is going. But at the end of the day, the best part of fantasy is still you and your buddies. Maybe it's college friends or your neighborhood, your work, getting together, in the office or in somebody's garage or a bar and doing a draft and, shooting the breeze, putting stickers on a board and making fun of the guy who, picked someone who retired 3 years ago, which happened in my league once, which was great. So that's what fantasy football really is too. It is a place to bring people together. And if you can win a few dollars on it, awesome. Because at the end of the day, you want to say, I beat my friends and I hold the trophy and I got the smack talk over everybody for a year. So that's to me what fantasy football is all about, is the camaraderie. And for me, that'll never die. That's what the crux of fantasy football is bringing people together.
Now, I know you said people don't normally come to you for top sleepers, but we're going to. So sorry.
All right. Hey, I do the work. It's just a matter of, I don't know. Maybe it's this inferiority complex of going to Oswego when everybody else, went to Syracuse and you're from Syracuse. You always think, well, there's somebody who can do it better than you, So when I see all these articles out there, I'm like, well, why would you read what I could write when there's 500 other guys doing the same thing? I don't know if you guys have ever felt that way, but
yes,
I see that from time to time. And I'm just like, that's why I'm like, you got to be, if you guys are wrestling fans and you guys know I am, Eric Bischoff, he ran WCW, has this great podcast called 83 Weeks. And he talks a lot about business and other things, but he says in business, in sports, and whatever you're doing, content creation, you can look at your competition and you can say, are you better than, are you equal than, are you different than? It's like there's no in between. It's you got to be either better than or different than, because if you're the same or worse, you're not going anywhere. So be different, and that's going to get you, I think the eyeballs that you want. And I don't know, it's a long-winded way of saying, like, sure, I'll do the content too, but I'm going to do it my way.
No, you're right, because everyone's got access to generally the same pool of information. It's how you present it that allows you to stand apart, from everyone else. But a lot of people that have fantasy football teams are getting ready for their drafts.
Yeah.
So what do you recommend, or what are some of your top, maybe not, they could be sleepers, they might not be, some maybe overlooked players. Like, so what are some of your strategies or suggestions as people go about their draft for this year?
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks in fantasy forget that not everybody who plays fantasy is some like super plugged in fantasy nerd. Like they get lost in this kind of hive mind on Twitter. Like everybody knows what targets per route run means, and everyone's, looking at, separation data, and they're not,
No.
people just show up, they buy a magazine at the gas station on their way to the draft, and they're like, all right, let's start picking guys. And they're like, oh my God, Saquon Barkley's not on the Giants. Like that's going to happen at a lot of drafts. People are going to be like, wait a minute, what team is this guy on? Happens all the time. So really know your rules of your league. That's first and foremost. Know, what rules benefit or scoring may benefit quarterbacks, might benefit receivers, tight ends, so just know that kind of stuff. And then some general fantasy knowledge for this year. Everybody is wide receiver drunk because the NFL is a passing league, right? And if you're in a point per reception league, meaning you get a point every time someone catches the football, I can absolutely see you taking a receiver in the first round. And there's a lot of great ones from Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, go down the line, AJ Brown. I'm still a purist. If I had the first pick, I'm taking Christian McCaffrey. He's a player and a half versus everybody else out there, because his team wants to get him the ball in every situation. He rarely ever comes off the field. He scores a bazillion touchdowns. He's got a great head coach and play caller in Kyle Shanahan. But if I don't get him, I love Breece Hall. I really love Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson is the guy next year who's going to be on the cover of all those magazines. And they're saying Bijan Robinson's the number one player. You're going to get him at like the 5th pick overall this year. And Bijan Robinson's going to set fantasy on fire. So if you don't get Christian McCaffrey, the world is not over. Take Breece Hall, take Bijan Robinson. I think you'll be fine with any of those guys. And then maybe later on in the first round, if you're still hungry for a running back, Jonathan Taylor, I think, is going to have a great year. And that guy, Saquon Barkley from those Giants, man. Joe Shane, just stop letting people record you. Show how inept you truly are. I mean, that Hard Knock show should have him on the unemployment line, but I think Saquon will have a nice season in Philadelphia.
As of later this morning, all of the teams in the NFL will now be open for training camp. So what do you think are some of the biggest storylines in the NFL as practices get underway?
I think it's, some of the most fascinating for the NFL and for fantasy. It's going to be Aaron Rodgers with the Jets. Aaron Rodgers as a person, you could probably take him or leave him. As a football player on this Jets team, they're going to be very good. And that might be hard for some folks to hear, but they've got a Super Bowl caliber defense. They've got one of the best young receivers in the league in Garrett Wilson on the outside. They got a stud at running back in Breece Hall. And if Rodgers can stay upright, the Jets are going to the playoffs. It's going to happen. They have a really, really good team. So I think that's a great storyline. I think he's going to elevate all the players on that team, including a super sleeper at tight end, Tyler Conklin. If you want to wait and get a tight end late in your draft, pick Tyler Conklin of the New York Jets. One of only like 5 tight ends over the last, I think it's 3 years. They have at least 50. I think it's to average 50 targets in a season. But regardless, Aaron Rodgers will be a huge story. Saquon in Philadelphia will be a huge story. Kirk Cousins in Atlanta is going to be a huge story because this is a team that has spent first-round draft capital on offensive skill positions 3 years in a row. And they've done nothing with it because Arthur Smith, who was their coach, is a complete idiot. And now he's in Pittsburgh. So good luck to, all the Yinzers over there in Pittsburgh who are cheering for the Steelers. But I think Kirky Cousins coming off the Achilles, it's going to be a big story in the NFL this year. And, just the quarterback contracts. Dallas is always big. Will they pay Dak Prescott? Is this his final season in Dallas? Which I think it could very well be. And will they pay CeeDee Lamb? So those are kind of some of the big stories going around the NFL that I think people are going to pay attention to. It's a quarterback league. People pay attention to the quarterbacks. By the time you hear this, Jordan Love very well may be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. And he will be for a week or two until, inevitably Dak Prescott gets paid. So That's how the NFL world turns.
Kansas City, again, coming, trying to win it again. Is it just getting
Ugh.
harder to pick against them, every year? They're just the Super Bowl favorite coming in again. Like every year it's just, can you go against them at this point? They just seem to, no matter what happens, pull it out.
I was at the Super Bowl this past year and I was sitting next to a 49ers fan. And this kid was so into the game and he was just like, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And it was halftime. And, the 49ers were doing well. And I kind of looked at him at one point in the second half. I go, buddy, I know how this movie ends. And you're not going to like it. And what happened? Mahomes drove him down. They go to overtime. They win the game. And it is tough because at the end of the day, just like when Brady was ruling the NFL, Kansas City is the best player in the league. And as long as he's on the field and he's got time on the clock, you cannot count him out. And now he's got real players at wide receiver that he didn't have before. Last year was really the last 2 years were the years to beat him. He didn't have any receivers.
Yeah, last year was brutal.
Yeah, I mean, he's out there with total scrubs. Travis Kelce's 55 years old. He's on tour with Taylor Swift, who I love, by the way. What now? He's got Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, who's not going to get suspended for that long. And then he's got Xavier Worthy, a new rookie who's really speedy on the outsides. Now he's got some weapons to go along with Kelce. So, I mean, that's going to be a problem. But boys, just think of the ratings in the playoffs. When Aaron Rodgers and the Jets come into Arrowhead.
Yeah.
And I mean, my God, like everybody in America is going to be watching that game.
Yeah.
So this is why the NFL TV contracts go for billions and billions of dollars.
Could the Giants do anything this year?
They could get the first pick in the draft, which is what I have them penciled in for. The Giants have a really good front four defensively. Very good front four. Maybe one of the top 5 in the league, probably, with the addition of Brian Burns. What they don't have is a quarterback. They have no running. Devin Singletary stinks. He couldn't beat out, some scrubs in Buffalo and last year he was kind of lucked into a role because Dameon Pierce doesn't know how to run in a zone scheme. But Devin Singletary is not very good. They have one weapon on the outside in Malik Neighbors, who for fantasy is going to get 1,000 targets a week, by the way. They have nobody else to throw the football to. Nobody. It's Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton. I mean, it's a who's who of who cares. So, yeah, the Giants, I think, are in line for the number 1 pick. And that would be great for Giants fans. Go get yourself a quarterback. Get out of this Daniel Jones mess and, kind of reset the franchise with this good young defense.
You mentioned the Cowboys. I mean, I've heard talk Giants going after Dak next year.
I mean, if you're the Giants, you were just crying that you couldn't pay Saquon Barkley and you pay Daniel Jones $40 million a year. And if you get rid of Daniel Jones, you're going to have some dead money on the books. You can't go pay $40-50 million a year to Dak Prescott. You need to go get that rookie who makes nothing, because that's how then they could build the team around him for 5-6 years until you have to extend him. So that's what I would love to see actually, I wouldn't like to see the Giants do anything. I'm an Eagles fan, but if the Giants had a competent GM, which I'm not sure that they do, that would be the move. But he already paid Daniel Jones. I don't think Daboll and Joe Shane make it to make the decision on this next quarterback. I think they'll probably both be out the door if the Giants, win 3 games and have the first pick.
We talked about the Jets, talked about Kansas City, the Bills. Can they finally get over the hump? I mean, Stephon Diggs is no longer there, but can they figure out a way to get to finally, kind of get over the hump of Kansas City and get to the Super Bowl and maybe win?
Could they? Sure. I mean, it's the NFL, anything can happen, but will they? If I had to bet on it, I'd say no. I'd say their window's kind of closed. They had Kansas City beat, whatever that game was, with 13 seconds on the clock, and they give the ball back to Mahomes and he goes down and wins the game. That was the Bills' year. That was the Bills' year to go to the Super Bowl, potentially win the Super Bowl, whatever. But now they just lost both safeties. At receiver, they're really young, really inexperienced. And the guys who are going to come in and start there, Curtis Samuel's a journeyman who's never really done much in the last few years. The Bills, because of that Josh Allen contract, are kind of hamstrung at this point, where I think they've lost a lot of talent this offseason, and I'm not necessarily sure they brought in a lot of game-changing talent to get over the hump in that really good AFC, because it's not just, hey, we got to beat the Chiefs. You got to get out of your division, which is Miami, which is a playoff team, which is the Jets, who are going to be outstanding. The Patriots stink, but they'll give you a fight twice a year. And then look around. I mean, the freaking AFC North had 4 teams over 500 last year. So there's a lot of really good teams and good quarterbacks in the AFC. So you've got to be special to get out of it. And that's why, number 15 in red makes all the money that he does.
Last question, serious football question here. Chris, Kevin, and I were talking recently, and we've decided that we want to challenge the current TOP and NYO students to a flag football game. Are you in?
Now, listen, if anybody listening to this knows my competitiveness and knows the glory that was the 2001 Golden Pitcher flag football game, where my WNYO team hung 70 plus on WTOP, and
Nice.
they did not score. I don't think they recorded a first down in that game. We went on the air after the game because I was a sports director, and I just said, hey, we're going to go on the air. We just broke into programming and did a post-game show about a flag football game. And it was unbelievable. We were intercepting passes at the line of scrimmage. My golf partner, Brian Dwyer, that's a guy you should have on the show. Brian Dwyer, who's works in Watertown as a TV reporter. At the line of scrimmage, WTOP has the football, and they're lining up, and they look scared. They don't know what they're doing. And then we would say, when I intercept this pass, I'm going to lateral it to you, and you go score. And we did it. I mean, talk about calling your shot. Not just like, hey, we're going to make a stop here. No, intercepting the ball, flipping it to that guy, and he's going to go score. So it was the greatest beatdown in the history of flag football. And of course I would play again. I can still run. I'll go out there and lock down some nerd from Long Island for 4 quarters. Let's go.
So, it's funny though. I sent it. I don't know where I saw it. I must have seen it on Twitter, I think. But I sent it to Chris and Kevin recently. The sports director for TOP, I believe it was. He apparently put on his likes, that he plays flag football, and I was like, now it's on. Now it's totally on.
We could probably get some guys up there. You guys had a day Ellis on. A day could run. He ran cross country and track with me at Oswego. I'm sure we could find some other old timers. Can Rob Sestorino still run? I don't know. He was in shape a while back.
He's got
we'll bring in some ringers. They don't know if they went to school there or not. It doesn't matter. Show up at the SU football team. Yeah, these guys were here. Don't worry about them. I graduated a year ago.
Oh man,
we're slowly going to try to round out a team.
Okay,
I'm sure we could make something happen. We got Chris Butts. I'm still in contact with him, but we'll find some guys. Can we get Dom Izzo off the couch to broadcast the game? Maybe remote from North Dakota.
I think this has the makings of a big event. I think they're going to do that. ACLs be damned. We'll have.
Oh yeah, that'll be brutal. But that game, I still have a picture somewhere of me holding. I'll have to. I think I have it in my cubby over here. I'll have to send it. You guys can put it in the show notes or something. Me holding the golden pitcher.
Nice.
From that. I hope they still have that, by the way.
Yes. They still have it.
They do.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they still have it.
I think it's like this. It's like the Stanley Cup. They've moved on to another version, I think, or since then. But
yeah, I mean, it was like an old Miller Genuine Draft plastic pitcher.
Yeah.
But we wrote the scores on there, I believe.
Yeah,
so.
it's still in the NYO office.
There you go. I got to go up there and see that. The new NYO office, by the way, it's so much nicer than the basement of Hewitt Union.
The whole thing is so much nicer.
Yeah, the whole thing. They have their own podcasting studio now. I mean, come
on.
And Hewitt Union, which is going to be Hewitt Hall, is going to have crazy podcasting studios all over the place, and it's going to be insane.
That's great. Good for those kids. I always felt when we went to Oswego, we were like a day late and a dollar short technology wise.
Definitely.
Like, I think you and I mentioned earlier, I remember cutting reel-to-reel tape in radio production class with Butch Charles. And I remember saying to him, I go, dude, I'm like working at, WHEN in Syracuse. Like, we don't do this. Like, you will never cut reel-to-reel tape at a professional station. Like, oh no, this is what you got to learn. You got to, like, what are we doing here? Like, I know kids that go to Syracuse, and they're editing, they've got little like MP3 players at that point. Oh, like, we're so behind the 8 ball here, but you get what you pay for. That's why we were there.
We get the experience earlier than they did, though. That's why.
Yeah, that is the good thing for sure. I mean, that's the one invaluable asset of Oswego's. I remember, like, I'm on the air doing radio shows and basketball games or whatever. I was like a freshman or sophomore. You'll never touch that at Syracuse.
No.
My great friend Bill Leaf, God rest his soul, he got to do like one football game his entire career. I went to the game and I listened with an earpiece in. Just I was so proud of him. But yeah, he got to do like one, and then he did like 2 basketball games in 4 years of busting his ass, going there overnights at WAER and writing, his ass off. But at Oswego, man, you can get on the air day one.
Yep.
So good for these kids, and I hope that Hewitt Hall is, it's pretty cool. I'll love to go see it one day. I got to get back for a comm studies dinner. I'm coming up. Let me know when it is this year.
I don't know if it's going to be this year. I think it's next year. I think it'll be next year. I don't think they're going to do them every year. I think they're going to do every other year.
I think they're doing every 3 years.
Oh,
it's going to be every 3 years now?
Yeah. So I think it might be 26?
Oh, my God.
We'll be dead by then.
That's
we'll see.
That's crazy. That's just crazy talk. What are we doing?
All right. We'll talk to the dean of the school.
Yeah, we're going to talk to the dean in a couple weeks.
Yeah. We'll tell her, look, we should make this every other year at a minimum.
Yeah. And can we get the Throwing Bagels podcast studios at Hewitt Hall?
We're working on it.
We're trying.
We're working on it.
Yeah. You guys got to record
we've
a show.
We've planted the seeds.
Oh, that'd be really cool.
Yeah. We've tried to plant the seeds a little bit.
They're just like, how much are you going to donate?
I know.
Exactly.
Here's $8.
I'll tell you what I got in my pocket.
the Throwing Bagels microphone bracket.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's that's cool though. Good for those kids. Yeah. God bless them.
Yeah, I don't know who's going to sponsor that.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us, coming back on the Throwing Bagels podcast, talk some football. Always a great time. And we wish you all the best, man. Good luck and continued success.
Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it. Sorry for being a little late. Not that our listeners knew that I was late, but no, yeah, you guys are doing awesome here. It's really fun stuff to see you keeping the Oswego alumni and memories alive here on the Throwing Bagels podcast. So keep kicking ass.
And that was Brian Drake, fellow Oswego grad, co-host of the Fantasy Points podcast and co-host of SiriusXM Fantasy Football Morning. Always a good time having Brian on the podcast, and I'm sure he'll be on a third time at some point in the near future.
Who knows? Maybe he'll be the first person in the Third Timers Club. You never know.
Possibly. So yeah, the moment NFL training camps open up, it's like, what's baseball? It takes it back. It's like, what is that sport?
Yeah, right.
But
if for all those football fans out there, they're like Gene Jonesing for football to start, now that the training camps are just about to start, and they're like freaking out.
Jason, you and I do not put MLB in a corner.
Not at all. Nobody puts baby in the corner.
So as we talk, we record these, of course, Monday nights. As I witness over Jason's right shoulder on his TV, the Mets salvage a split of a 4-game series against the worst team in the National League.
Pathetic.
So not a great way to start the second half.
When Jeff McNeil hits 2 home runs for you in a game, you got to win that game.
You better win. Exactly.
I lost that game on Friday, and then barely hung on Saturday, 1-0, and then again they lose again yesterday. I'm like, you got to win today. You can't lose again today. They did well today. I mean, they pulled it out. They only won 6-4. So, thankfully Lindor hit 2 home runs, but
I think the winning run was at the plate in the bottom of the 9th, and when Diaz closed it out. So it's like, come on, man. Come on.
they definitely make it tough on you. I'll tell you that.
They do.
You have to
They
have
do.
intestinal fortitude to be a Mets fan.
Oh yeah. And we're like tried and true veterans at this by now, Jason.
Exactly. I'm trying to teach it to my kids. My kids are already like, oh, they're gonna blow it, aren't they?
Ah,
And I'm like, it's
yeah.
very possible.
They're already there. They're already real Mets fans.
Yeah, my wife and I have taught them well. We were like, just wait for them to blow it.
Well, so we are a week as we talk. We are when you hear this, so we record on Monday nights and then we put them online Wednesday mornings. So when you're listening to this on a Wednesday morning, we're a week away from the Major League Baseball trading deadline. And as I mentioned in my latest blog, in the latest Throwing Bagels blog, I think the Mets should really look at they should be buyers. And at first, when they were kind of swirling around the bowl, if you will, in late May, you thought, okay, the bottom's about to fall out and that's the end of it. They're going to sell everything. But then the Grimace, ever since Grimace made the first pitch at Citi
OMG.
Field, they have been on a roll.
Grimace and Candelita.
Yeah. So
my kids, that's another thing my kids love. Every day we play OMG in my house. Every day.
Penned by Jose Iglesias, the Mets infielder and rap hip hop superstar, right?
Exactly.
So it is kind of funny how things have been clicking into place lately. I think the chemistry is certainly there, but the Mets have a week to figure out what they're going to do at the trading deadline, and I think given the last couple of years, they've stockpiled enough prospects where they could probably swing a deal for some significant help for the bullpen.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely could. But it all depends on. I mean, Stearns definitely has he has some sort of plan in his head, and he's not the type to go out and really spend on people. To go out and like really trade chips to bring in whatever. You got to remember, like, there's now that so many teams make the playoffs. There's a huge market out there for relief pitching. Relief pitching is the biggest thing out there right now, and everybody needs them. And these teams that have them, like the Marlins and the White Sox, and like the teams that are going nowhere, they're like, all right, you want it? All right, here you go. And they're like, I'm not giving up my top prospect for like a middle reliever. Would you out of your mind? And I think Stearns is one of those guys that he won't do it. But the question is what will he do? And Cohen definitely wants to win, but he doesn't also want to blow up he's preached for a while. He wants to build up the farm system, and they've done it, and they've really started to build it up. But you're going to have to give something to get something. It's just a matter of how much are you willing to give. And I don't want to give up too much. They've done such a good job of building some assets. So it all depends if it's maybe a lower level guy or something like that. It's a possibility, but I don't know. I don't know what they'll do. I mean, and then you still have the whole Pete Alonso thing. What are they going to do with Pete Alonso? Are they going to trade him? Are they going to keep him? You keep him, you have to. Then you take the risk of losing him. But right. I mean, he's obviously overvalued himself, and he's not. He's definitely not playing himself into a very good contract next year. So.
I think he's going to regret not taking the deal the Mets offered him, which was a really competitive deal among first basemen in the majors.
It was probably more. I don't know if it was more than what like Freeman and Olsen got, or it was right around there.
Yeah,
but he should have taken it. He's trying to push it to get more than what they get, and he's not as good as them, especially Freeman. Freeman's the best first baseman in baseball. You're not getting more than Freddie Freeman is. He's a better defensive player. He's a better all-around offensive player. Pete hits for power, but he's not even hitting for as much power this year. So I could see, I don't know. Does Pete just say Pete suck it up and say, okay, I'll take the deal, whatever, but Boris is his agent. So, or does he do the whole Boris thing and wait it out, and then February comes and he doesn't have a team, and then spring training starts and he's still not signed? That seems to have been the Boris MO the last couple off seasons, where players are just sitting there, while teams are in spring training because they haven't signed with a team yet.
I think if the Mets manage to deal him, I don't see him coming back. I don't see him coming back to the Mets. So
I don't know if I don't think they're going to deal him. I really don't. With being in the hunt for the playoffs right now, they're in a wild card spot. They've taken to split, with the Marlins. They're going to Yankee Stadium tomorrow. Then they have the Braves coming in. I mean, at least the Braves are a little hobbled right now. I don't know if that's going to help at all, but
no.
It doesn't matter who the Braves could throw out a bunch of 12-year-old little leaguers and the Mets would still lose because they could never beat the Braves.
No.
And the little league would throw a no-hitter against them. So who knows what the Mets are going to do in the next 5 games, with between the Yankees and the Braves. If they can take 3 of those 5, I'll be happy.
Sign me up.
Yeah,
for that. Yeah,
and then they're not even far off of the Braves at this point. They're only I think at last check, five games back or something like that. So no one's catching the Phillies. Phillies are just way out. They've pretty much wrapped up the division already.
I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens. Should be an interesting week, Jason, to see what transpires between now and then.
Yeah, I mean it'll be interesting. I mean the Mets have a bunch of prospects in AA, a bunch of prospects in, between Brooklyn and St. Lucie that they could give up but I just don't want to give up. Honestly, who I could see them possibly dealing because they have a catcher is Kevin Parada, because he's in AA right now. He's a rising prospect. If you can get something really good for him, you have Alvarez. Where's he's blocked, and hypothetically they do sign Alonso. Can't go to first base, and even if they did lose Alonso, I think they'd probably put Vientos at first base then. So I don't see him having a spot in New York anytime in the near future.
And who knows, man? I mean, your son would be very disappointed, but I think Beatty might also be. I know.
So,
and my wife would be disappointed too. Brett Beatty's her favorite player.
Oh man, I don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah, but you don't have to like. There's a big difference between your wife and my my 7-year-old son.
My wife would say, "Oh well."
My son will scream and cry and run around the house. He'll be like Brian Drake's son after they lost the Super Bowl.
Oh man! Well, for your son's sake, I hope Brett Beatty stays a Met after the trading deadline. How about that?
Yeah, I really do. I actually have slightly warned him that there's a possibility that Brett Beatty may not be on the Mets at some point. I have tried to plant the seeds a little bit. I don't know how much a 7-year-old is going to understand that. I did talk to my kids about Pete Alonso probably not being on the Mets next year already, and they actually seem to understand that. I was like, we were talking about the other day. I was like, do you remember what I told you? Pete Alonso is a free agent after this season, and he's not going to be on the Mets possibly. And they're like, yeah, I remember that. So we'll see what happens when that comes around.
Until then, Jason, it's been a pleasure.
As always.
And we will see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks for listening. And you can catch us online anytime, throwingbagels.com. You can email us, throwingbagelspodcast@gmail.com. Also check out our socials. They're all over our website. We did add the little YouTube icon as well on our website. So you can check out all of our media channels right off of throwingbagels.com. Chris Staglis, who is on assignment globetrotting, he will be back with a blog this coming Monday, so make sure you check that out, and we will see you next time.
Bye.